Leonardo da Vinci, born on the 15th of April, 1452, in the small town of Vinci in the Republic of Florence, was a child of paradoxes. He was the illegitimate son of Ser Piero da Vinci, a notary, and a peasant woman named Caterina. Although his birth status barred him from formal education and noble privileges, Leonardo would rise to become one of the most revered figures in Western civilization. In an age where lineage often defined one's potential, Leonardo defied societal norms with sheer intellect, insatiable curiosity, and artistic genius. The town of Vinci, surrounded by rolling Tuscan hills and olive groves, provided young Leonardo with a natural landscape that would inspire him for life. The rural setting cultivated his observational skills, particularly of flora and fauna, weather patterns, and water movement themes that would appear repeatedly in his later work. Though he had no formal university education, Leonardo's early aptitude for drawing, especially of natural subjects, became apparent at a young age. His notebooks, which would later become priceless historical artifacts, show that even as a teenager, he was already obsessed with the structure of plants, birds, human anatomy, and machines. At the age of 14, Leonardo moved to Florence to become an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the most prominent artists of the time. Verrocchio's studio was a melting pot of painting, sculpture, mechanics, and design. This environment was perfectly suited for Leonardo's polymath mind. In Verrocchio's workshop, Leonardo learned techniques of painting, sculpting, metalwork, drafting, and carpentry. More importantly, he was introduced to the concept of art as science, the idea that observation, mathematics, and geometry were as essential to painting as pigment and brush. It is said that Leonardo's skill quickly surpassed his master's. The most famous story involves the painting The Baptism of Christ, 1475-78, where Leonardo was tasked with painting one of the angels. According to legend, Verrocchio was so amazed by Leonardo's contribution that he resolved never to paint again. This tale may be apocryphal, but it captures the spirit of Leonardo's early genius. His angel was different, softer, more luminous, more alive, a stark contrast to the rigid forms of the traditional Florentine school. What set Leonardo apart from his peers was not only technical skill, but also how he observed the world. He sketched endlessly. His notebooks are filled with diagrams of human muscles, birds in flight, turbulent rivers, and mechanical inventions. These were not idle drawings, they were scientific studies, decades ahead of their time. He believed that the eye was the most noble sense, and that visual observation was the truest form of knowledge. Painting, he wrote, is a science and should be pursued as such. He dissected corpses often illegally to understand the structure of the human body. He studied the branching of trees to uncover geometric rules. He analyzed how light reflected off surfaces, how perspective altered perception, and how clouds formed in the atmosphere. His drawings of the human fetus, the vascular system, and the brain remain stunning even today, both in accuracy and aesthetic beauty. By the 1472nd, Leonardo's talent was no secret in Florence. He began to receive commissions from local churches and patrons, though he was notorious for his reluctance to complete them. One of his early works, The Adoration of the Magi, commissioned by the Augustinian monks of San Donato, was never finished. Yet even in its incomplete form, the painting reveals Leonardo's innovative composition, emotional depth, and mastery of perspective. Leonardo's restlessness was both a curse and a gift. He rarely finished what he started: paintings, treatises, inventions, but he constantly innovated. He was not satisfied with convention. He wanted to discover, to push boundaries, to combine art and science. In 1482, he left Florence and moved to Milan, seeking greater opportunities. There he wrote a famous letter to Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, offering his services as a military engineer, architect, sculptor, and painter. The letter, often referred to as Leonardo's resume, focused primarily on his ability to design war machines, catapults, bridges, cannons, only at the end mentioning his talent as an artist. It was in Milan that Leonardo would reach new heights, painting The Last Supper and conceptualizing some of his most iconic inventions. Leonardo da Vinci embodies the Renaissance ideal, a man whose knowledge was not confined to one discipline, but extended into many. As a teenager, he was already merging disciplines that most people kept separate. His love of geometry made his paintings mathematically sound. His studies in anatomy brought unparalleled realism to his figures. His interest in optics improved his use of shadow and light, chiaroscuro and sfumato. His understanding of hydraulics allowed him to sketch machines centuries ahead of their time. He was, in a way, inventing modern science while perfecting Renaissance art. The 15th century was a time of dramatic change in Europe. The Renaissance, literally rebirth, marked a revival of interest in classical antiquity, humanism, and scientific inquiry. In the world of art, this meant the rejection of medieval symbolism in favor of realism, emotional expression, and naturalism. Florence, Rome, and Milan became cultural epicenters, patronized by powerful families like the Medici and the Sforza. Artists were no longer viewed merely as craftsmen, but as intellectuals, thinkers who contributed to knowledge. Leonardo da Vinci emerged not only as a product of this cultural revolution, but as one of its defining architects. His artistic techniques broke with the static traditions of his predecessors and redefined what painting could be. Leonardo is best remembered not only for what he painted, but how he painted. His style was subtle, emotional, and deeply rooted in observation. Chiaroscuro, the art of light and shadow. Leonardo mastered chiaroscuro, the technique of using strong contrasts between light and dark to give the illusion of depth. This technique added a dramatic realism to his work. Unlike the flatness of medieval painting, Leonardo's use of light suggested three-dimensionality and weight. In The Virgin of the Rocks, for instance, the gentle diffusion of light over the figures creates a soft, lifelike quality. The light does not simply illuminate, it tells a story, guiding the viewer's eyes across the canvas. Sfumato, the smoky transition. Perhaps his greatest contribution to painting technique is sfumato, from the Italian sfumare, to evaporate like smoke. It is the delicate blending of colors and tones without hard edges, allowing transitions between light and dark to appear soft and seamless. The best example? Mona Lisa. Her enigmatic smile, often debated for centuries, is made possible by sfumato. There are no harsh outlines around her mouth or eyes. Instead, Leonardo created a mist-like softness that gives her an ethereal quality. Sfumato allowed Leonardo to simulate the way light behaves in nature, making his paintings feel less like depictions and more like extensions of the natural world. What truly separated Leonardo from his peers was his scientific approach to art. He did not simply imitate reality, he understood it. He spent hours observing human faces, body movement, animals, clouds, and light sources. His paintings are not just beautiful, they are anatomically and physically precise. He wrote, "He who does not master the foundations of nature will never create art." And so he pursued. Anatomy. He dissected over 30 human corpses, producing hundreds of detailed anatomical drawings. Botany. His sketches of plants and trees reflect his desire to understand growth patterns and biological structures. Hydrodynamics. Water is a recurring theme in his paintings and sketches, often showing movement and energy. Optics. He explored how the eye perceives depth, light, and motion, directly influencing how he painted reflections and shadows. Leonardo did not separate art from science. To him, they were two lenses through which one could better grasp reality. Breaking traditions. innovation in composition and perspective. Before Leonardo, many religious paintings were stiff, symmetrical, and symbolic. Figures often appeared flat, and backgrounds were frequently gold-leafed or abstract. Leonardo shattered these conventions. Use of perspective. Leonardo was a pioneer of linear perspective, the mathematical technique for representing three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. In The Last Supper, the vanishing point draws the eye to the central figure of Christ, anchoring the entire composition. The use of architectural lines, perspective, and spatial depth creates an immersive narrative scene, as if the viewer is sitting at the table. Dynamic poses and expressions. Leonardo introduced natural poses and emotional expressions. No longer did saints and Madonnas stare blankly into the void. His figures were caught in motion, turning, gesturing, reacting. Their faces conveyed thought, fear, joy, and introspection. For example, in The Virgin and Child with St. Anne, the interlocked gazes and gestures of the characters create a spiral of movement that draws the viewer in. Leonardo's sketchbooks are legendary. Containing over 7,000 pages, many now preserved, they reveal a mind that never stopped imagining. He drew flying machines, submarines, parachutes, cranes, gears and pulleys, weapons of war. While most of these were never built, their level of sophistication was astonishing for the time. His notebooks show mirror writing, diagrams, anatomical studies, mathematical formulas, and poetic musings. One might ask, what do flying machines have to do with painting? For Leonardo, everything was connected. Understanding motion, physics, and structure allowed him to portray the world more truthfully. Leonardo was not just a thinker, he was also a relentless experimenter in materials. He invented his own pigments and varnishes. He tested different types of canvas and plaster. He used oil paints with a richness and fluidity that surpassed many of his contemporaries. However, his constant experimentation sometimes led to problems. The Last Supper began to deteriorate within years of completion because Leonardo had attempted a novel dry plaster technique rather than true fresco. But even in technical failure, Leonardo achieved emotional triumph. The expressions, movement, and psychology of The Last Supper remain unmatched. Leonardo believed that beauty in art was not about idealization, it was about truth. His beauty was found in aged faces, crooked trees, and flowing rivers. He wrote, "A painter should begin every canvas with a wash of black, because all things in nature are dark except where exposed by the light." This world view is evident in his drawings of old men, gnarled hands, and weathered rock formations. There is a quiet dignity in everything he captured, from angels to peasants. Leonardo da Vinci did not invent painting, but he transformed it. He gave it breath, emotion, science, and movement. His techniques influenced every major painter after him, from Raphael and Caravaggio to Rembrandt and even modern surrealists. His work was not about decoration, but revelation. He painted the world as it is and as it could be. Every shadow, every glance, every mechanical drawing was a step toward understanding the vast mystery of life. Leonardo did not just paint the Renaissance. He was the Renaissance, the Mona Lisa, the eternal smile. Perhaps the most iconic painting in history, Mona Lisa, also known as La Gioconda, is an enigma cloaked in art. Painted between 1503 and 1506, and possibly worked on for years beyond that, it now hangs behind bulletproof glass in the Louvre Museum in Paris. The fame of the painting lies not only in its artistry, but also in the mystery it exudes. Who was she? The woman depicted is believed to be Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a Florentine merchant named Francesco del Giocondo. Yet her identity is still debated. Some believe she was a composite of multiple women, a courtesan, or even a feminized version of Leonardo himself. Her smile, the most analyzed smile in history, is a masterpiece of sfumato technique. It is elusive, changing depending on the angle from which one views it. Is she happy, melancholic, amused? Her expression resists definition. Leonardo's subtle transitions of tone around the lips and cheeks create a sense of motion, making her feel alive. Her eyes seem to follow the viewer from any angle, deepening the effect. The surreal, almost dreamlike landscape behind her adds to the intrigue. Winding paths, misty mountains, and winding rivers mirror Leonardo's fascination with geology and fluid motion. They also contrast with the figure's stillness, enhancing the emotional depth. Mona Lisa is not merely a portrait, it is a psychological landscape. The image symbolizes the harmony between humanity and nature, mystery and knowledge. It's a silent conversation between the subject and the viewer, inviting endless interpretation. Painted between 1495 and 1498 on the wall of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, the Last Supper captures the moment Jesus announces that one of his disciples will betray him. Leonardo transforms a biblical scene into a psychological drama unlike anything seen before. The vanishing point is centered behind Christ's head, forming a perfect triangle with his outstretched arms. The table acts as a stage, and the disciples are grouped in dynamic clusters of 3, each reacting differently, some shocked, some angry, others confused. Every figure has a unique emotional response. Peter leans forward aggressively. John appears serene and introspective. Judas Iscariot recoils into shadow, clutching a small bag symbol of the silver he received for the betrayal. Leonardo does not merely paint faces, he paints minds in motion. Leonardo experimented with a dry plaster method to allow for finer detail, but it began deteriorating quickly. Despite countless restorations, much of the original paint is lost. Still, the composition and emotional intensity remain potent. Beyond religion, The Last Supper speaks to choice, consequence, and human complexity. It's not just a depiction of an event, it's a snapshot of human reaction to moral crisis. Vitruvian Man, the perfect human. Drawn around 1490, Vitruvian Man is one of the most recognizable illustrations in history. It shows a male figure in 2 superimposed positions, with arms and legs apart, inscribed in a circle and a square. Inspired by the Roman architect Vitruvius, Leonardo sought to explore the proportions of the human body as reflections of the universe's geometry. The circle and square represent spiritual and material perfection, respectively. The figure's navel is at the center of the circle. The square touches his limbs, illustrating symmetry. This is not just an anatomical sketch, it's a philosophical diagram, a visual manifesto that humanity is the measure of all things. It merges art, science, and spirituality in one elegant form. Vitruvian Man influenced not only artists and architects, but mathematicians, philosophers, and engineers. It is the visual embodiment of Renaissance humanism, the adoration of the Magi, unfinished revolution. Commissioned in 1481 by the Augustinian monks of San Donato, the Adoration of the Magi was meant to depict the 3 wise men paying homage to the infant Jesus. Leonardo never completed it, but even in its unfinished state, it's revolutionary. Rather than placing the Holy Family in the center, Leonardo surrounded them with swirling groups of figures, each in expressive poses. Chaos and awe blend in a masterful composition. Leonardo used this work to experiment with facial expression and gesture. The figures look upward, inward, at each other, forming a web of psychological interaction. Lady with an ermine, a symbol of sophistication. Painted around 1489-1490, Lady with an Ermine is a portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, the mistress of Ludovico Sforza. She is shown holding an ermine, a symbol of purity and elegance. The figure is turned at an angle, a break from the flat, rigid portraits of earlier times. Her gaze is alert, suggesting intellect and poise. The ermine, beautifully painted with soft fur and gentle expression, links the sitter to her patron, Ludovico, who was associated with the animal. The painting is a quiet masterpiece of layered meaning, Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, the circle of life. Completed around 1510, this complex composition shows the Virgin Mary seated on her mother Saint Anne's lap, playing with the infant Jesus who tugs at a lamb, a symbol of sacrifice. The three generations of holy women reflect the continuity of divine motherhood. The playful interaction between Jesus and the Lamb foreshadows the Passion. Leonardo arranged the figures in a spiraling motion, blending grace and movement. The background landscape continues his fascination with geology and nature. Salvator Mundi, the mystical Redeemer. Disputed for centuries and rediscovered only recently, Salvator Mundi, Savior of the World, became the most expensive painting ever sold at auction, $450 million in 2017. Christ is portrayed in Renaissance robes, holding a crystal orb and raising his right hand in benediction, crystal ball and optics. The orb was painted without distortion, defying how glass works. Was this an oversight, or Leonardo's deliberate message that the spiritual world is not bound by natural law? The painting's attribution remains debated, but many believe the hand of Leonardo is evident in the face, the blessing gesture, and the mysterious stillness. Landscape drawing for Santa Maria della Neve, first known work. This pen and ink drawing from 1473 is Leonardo's first known dated work. It shows a wide Tuscan valley with hills, a river, and a castle incredibly detailed and precise. It reveals his lifelong interest in nature, geography, and perspective. Even at age 21, Leonardo was seeing the world not just as an artist, but as a geologist, cartographer, and scientist. Leonardo left many works unfinished, not because he lacked discipline, but because he was constantly exploring new ideas. His mind moved faster than his brush. Unfinished works include Saint Jerome in the Wilderness, Leda and the Swan, Battle of Anghiari. Each reveals new insights into his evolving style, techniques, and philosophical pursuits. Leonardo's famous works are not merely artistic achievements, they are windows into the future. They transcend beauty, offering psychological insight, scientific precision, spiritual symbolism, philosophical depth. From the mystical serenity of Mona Lisa to the dramatic motion of the Last Supper, Leonardo's legacy is one of unified knowledge. He painted not just faces or events, he painted truth. His paintings continue to inspire, challenge, and mystify. They are eternal not because they are perfect, but because they are infinitely rich. Leonardo da Vinci's greatest inventions may not be his paintings, but his notebooks. Spanning over 7,000 surviving pages, these journals contain drawings, observations, mathematical equations, mechanical designs, anatomical studies, philosophical musings, and even grocery lists. These notebooks include the Codex Atlanticus, 1,119 pages of engineering and scientific studies. The Codex Leicester, a treatise on water and astronomy, once owned by Bill Gates. The Codex on the Flight of Birds, a precursor to modern aviation studies. What's striking is that these works were never meant for publication. Leonardo wrote them as tools for thought, private, evolving, unfinished. Most are written in mirror script, reversed handwriting, possibly to keep others from stealing his ideas or simply to suit his left-handedness. Through these pages, we glimpse a mind centuries ahead of its time. Between 1489 and 1513, Leonardo carried out dozens of dissections, human and animal, often illegally and in secrecy. He saw the body as a machine, and his aim was to understand its mechanics. The muscles and skeleton. Leonardo's anatomical drawings remain astonishing in accuracy. Muscles shown in layers and movement. skeletal structures drawn in perfect proportion, detailed joints, ligaments, and posture studies. His studies of the shoulder, spine, and hands are especially detailed, exploring both anatomy and motion. The brain and nervous system, Leonardo attempted to locate the seat of the soul and the origin of thought. He dissected the brain and illustrated cranial nerves, the ventricles, the optic chiasm. Though he lacked modern tools, he created some of the first neurological diagrams in history. The heart and circulatory system. In one of his most advanced investigations, Leonardo studied the heart valves. He was the first to correctly describe how blood moves through the chambers, and valves, a discovery that modern science wouldn't verify until the 20th century. He made wax casts of ox hearts to understand flow dynamics and turbulence. The fetus in the womb. One of his most famous drawings shows a fetus curled in the womb, serene, detailed, and surrounded by delicate uterine structures. This study combined anatomy, emotion, the miracle of life. It stands as one of the most touching and scientifically accurate depictions of prenatal life in Renaissance art. Leonardo was obsessed with flight, a dream that predates modern aviation by 400 years. He studied birds, bats, wind patterns, and the structure of feathers. The ornithopter. He designed a human-powered flying machine with flapping wings, the ornithopter. Though impractical, it revealed a deep understanding of aerodynamics and muscle power. The parachute. He drew a pyramid-shaped parachute made of linen with a wooden frame. In 2000, a British skydiver tested a replica and found it worked safely, proving Leonardo's genius. The aerial screw, a predecessor to the helicopter, this spiral-shaped rotor would lift by spinning rapidly. While it couldn't fly with the materials of his time, it laid the groundwork for future concepts. Leonardo's mechanical drawings cover civil, military, and hydraulic engineering. He imagined a world where machines could extend human power, some functional, others fantastical. Machines and mechanics. His notebooks include gear systems and pulleys, self-propelled carts, precursors to automobiles, ball bearings, mechanical drums, automated looms. He understood principles of leverage, torque, and friction, using them to design cranes, bridges, and lifting devices. Military designs. Leonardo worked under powerful patrons like Ludovico Sforza and Cesare Borgia, who employed him as a military engineer. His war machines include multi-barreled cannons, armored tanks with rotating turrets, giant crossbows, fortification plans. Though many were never built, they demonstrate a chilling blend of artistry and destruction. Hydraulic innovations. Leonardo proposed canal systems to irrigate and transport, water wheels and pumps, dams and flood control, river diversion to protect cities. He designed the first scuba gear meant for underwater sabotage, complete with air tubes, floats, and pressure resistance. Leonardo designed buildings that combined classical symmetry, human-centric proportion, structural ingenuity. His architectural works include central plan churches, spiral staircases, urban planning schemes, multi-story buildings with separate flows for traffic, and sewage, a precursor to modern cities. Though few were built, his architectural notebooks influenced Renaissance architects like Bramante and Palladio. Leonardo did not consider himself a scientist in the modern sense. He had no formal schooling, didn't publish theories, and used observation rather than controlled experiments. But he practiced what we now call the scientific method. He studied light and optics, understanding reflection, refraction, and how the eye works. Water movement, including eddies, whirlpools, and tides. Geology, proposing that fossils on mountaintops were from ancient seas. Astronomy, hypothesizing that the moon reflects sunlight and explaining earthshine. In many fields, Leonardo anticipated discoveries centuries before their time. Leonardo famously wrote, "Those who take for their standard anyone but reason and experience are bound to be deceived." He distrusted blind tradition, unfounded dogma, and second-hand accounts. His method was observe, record, analyze, draw conclusions. He blended empirical study with deep reflection, fusing logic and creativity in a way unmatched in his time. Despite his brilliance, Leonardo published almost nothing. Many of his scientific insights were unknown until the 19th and 20th centuries. Reasons include his perfectionism constantly revising, fear of persecution, dissections, and heretical ideas were dangerous. Lack of institutional support, he was an outsider to academia. As a result, much of his work had no direct influence in his time, yet it now stands as a monument to independent genius. Leonardo da Vinci is now revered as a father of modern anatomy, a precursor to robotics, a pioneer of hydrodynamics and aeronautics, an architect of multidisciplinary thinking. His legacy lives in medical illustrations, engineering textbooks, flight science, STEM education, museums and scientific institutions. Modern scientists admire him not because he was always right, but because he dared to ask questions no one else did. He was a man centuries ahead of his era, and yet deeply human in his curiosity, wonder, and drive. A mind restless and boundless, Leonardo da Vinci was a man of paradoxes, both meticulous and distracted, sociable yet secretive, deeply curious yet often unwilling to finish projects. Understanding his personality offers insights not only into his art and inventions, but into the nature of creativity itself. He wasn't merely a painter or inventor, he was an explorer of truth in all forms. One of Leonardo's most famous traits was his inability to stick to a single task. He began dozens of projects and completed few. Patrons became frustrated with him. Commissions were abandoned midway. Paintings like Adoration of the Magi and St. Jerome remained unfinished. But this was not laziness, it was mental overload. Leonardo's curiosity knew no bounds. He was constantly shifting between disciplines, dissecting cadavers, studying bird flight, designing weapons, sketching faces, writing philosophical notes. This made him what modern psychologists might call a polymath or even a multipotentialite, someone whose intelligence spreads across many fields and resists narrow focus. His mind moved faster than his hand could draw. Every answer led to more questions. Leonardo's ability to observe was nearly superhuman. He once wrote, "There are three classes of people: those who see when they are shown, those who do not see." He belonged firmly in the first group. He noticed the way light curved around a leaf. He recorded the angle of a bird's wing in mid-flight. He described the slight distortion of water as it flows over pebbles. He noted how emotions subtly shift in a person's face. His notebooks are full of micro-observations. His eye was not just trained, it was reverent. He did not glance, he beheld. Despite being employed in royal courts and mingling with aristocrats, Leonardo remained personally enigmatic. He never married. He had no known children. He rarely disclosed personal feelings in his notebooks. He shunned fame in favor of exploration. His tendency to write in mirror script has been interpreted as a form of privacy, though it may have simply been easier for him as a left-hander. Leonardo was not religious in a traditional sense, though he painted sacred scenes. His writing rarely refers to Christian doctrine. Instead, his reverence lay in nature itself, a belief that the divine was found in symmetry, motion, proportion, and form. Leonardo's sexuality remains a subject of debate. Several court records from 1476 suggest he was accused but acquitted of sodomy, a crime in Renaissance Florence. Though he never had a recorded romantic relationship with a woman, he kept the company of young male assistants. His most devoted companion was Gian Giacomo Caprotti, nicknamed Salai, a youth of questionable behavior who remained with Leonardo for 25 years. While modern labels don't fit neatly, Leonardo's emotional world seems to have been deeply internal and artistically expressed, not publicly declared. Leonardo believed that nature was the ultimate teacher. Nature is the source of all true knowledge. She has her own logic, her own laws. She has no effect without cause, nor invention without necessity. He saw God not in dogma, but in geometry, in the spiral of a shell, the curve of a river, the symmetry of the human body. His worldview resembled pantheism, a reverence for the unity of all things. He rejected superstition. He criticized alchemy, astrology, and magical thinking, preferring experiment and evidence. His only true religion was the pursuit of understanding. Accounts from contemporaries and his own notes paint a picture of Leonardo's daily life. He slept very little, possibly following polyphasic sleep cycles. He ate mostly vegetarian food, unusual for his time. He carried notebooks everywhere, sketching constantly. He bought birds in cages only to release them, a sign of compassion and perhaps a metaphor for his free-thinking spirit. He was known to be physically strong and attractive, fond of music, and elegant in dress. He wore pink tunics and had a flair for fashion not as vanity, but as aesthetic expression. Even his appearance was a form of design. Leonardo's notebooks contain not only technical data, but also aphorisms, jokes, and reflections. Learning never exhausts the mind. Art is the queen of all sciences, communicating knowledge to all the generations of the world. He who loves practice without theory is like the sailor who boards ship without a rudder. He often warned against arrogance, superficiality, and blind faith. His tone was humble, sometimes mournful, as though he knew the world would not fully understand him. Leonardo moved among kings and popes, but had few close friends. His most important relationships were Andrea del Verrocchio, his teacher, who trained him in the Florentine style; Lorenzo de' Medici, the ruler who supported his early career; Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, his longest-serving patron; Cesare Borgia, a ruthless military leader who hired Leonardo as a military engineer; Francesco Melzi, a young nobleman who became Leonardo's most devoted student and inherited his notebooks. He clashed with Michelangelo, who found Leonardo aloof and arrogant. Their rivalry was legendary in Florence. In his later years, Leonardo lived in France under the patronage of King Francis I. He brought with him his notebooks and some of his most beloved paintings, including the Mona Lisa. He died on May 2, 1519, at age 67, the Château du Clos-Lucé, near Amboise. According to legend, he died in the arms of the king, though this is more poetic than historically confirmed. His grave lies in the chapel of Saint Hubert in the castle grounds. He left behind fewer than 20 completed paintings, thousands of pages of sketches and writings, a legend that still grows. Modern psychologists view Leonardo as a visual thinker, a hyper-curious personality, possibly neurodivergent. Some propose traits of ADHD or high-functioning autism. His genius was not the result of training alone, but of unrelenting attention, pattern recognition, and emotional sensitivity. Leonardo da Vinci is not just admired, he is loved, not for being perfect, but for being profoundly human. He struggled with focus. He never published most of his findings. He questioned everything, even himself. And yet, from this complexity emerged beauty, knowledge, and wonder that still echoes today. He showed us that one mind can contain art and science, spirit and logic, softness and strength. Leonardo didn't just study life. He illuminated it. Leonardo da Vinci's influence spans across centuries, cultures, and disciplines. Though he produced relatively few completed works during his lifetime, his ideas, notebooks, and techniques changed the trajectory of Western civilization. Today, Leonardo is seen not only as a Renaissance artist, but as a universal symbol of human potential. Leonardo's artistic innovations shaped the course of painting for hundreds of years. His mastery of sfumato, chiaroscuro, perspective, and human emotion became foundational in European art. Influenced artists, Raphael, adopted Leonardo's graceful compositions and tender Madonnas. Caravaggio pushed chiaroscuro to dramatic extremes. Rembrandt built on Leonardo's use of light and inner psychology. Salvador Dalí revered Leonardo as a surrealist before his time. Even artists as late as Vincent van Gogh, Frida Kahlo, and Andy Warhol drew inspiration from Leonardo's visual storytelling and obsession with the human condition. Leonardo's works are now housed in the most prestigious museums: Mona Lisa, Louvre, Paris; The Last Supper, Convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, Milan; Virgin of the Rocks, National Gallery, London; Vitruvian Man, Gallerie dell'Accademia, Venice. Each serves as a pilgrimage site for millions of admirers. Leonardo is often called the father of modern science, not because he followed the scientific method perfectly, but because he pioneered observational reasoning and interdisciplinary research. Influences on science. Anatomy. His drawings were referenced by doctors and surgeons even into the 20th century. Aviation. His sketches inspired early flight engineers. Robotics. His mechanical knights were conceptual forerunners of automation. Optics. He laid groundwork for understanding lenses and visual perception. Geology. He observed fossils and sedimentation before modern geology was born. His blending of theoretical exploration and hands-on observation inspired generations of scientists from Galileo to Newton to Einstein. Engineering and technology. The unrealized inventor. Many of Leonardo's inventions were never built in his lifetime due to limitations in materials and tools, but his engineering sketches were centuries ahead of their time. Today, engineers revisit his designs to build models of flying machines, prototypes of hydraulic devices, functional robotic systems. Modern software has digitally reconstructed his ideas, proving that many of them would have worked. Leonardo has been posthumously celebrated as a visionary engineer whose mind predated the industrial age. Leonardo became the archetype of the Renaissance man, a polymath whose knowledge spanned art, science, music, architecture, anatomy, and beyond. He represents curiosity without boundaries, the union of art and science, humanist idealism, imagination as a force for progress. His name is invoked across literature, film, education, and even branding, from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to the Da Vinci surgical robot. Leonardo's notebooks are now studied in art academies, medical schools, engineering programs, and philosophy departments. They are not only historical artifacts, but pedagogical tools. Universities teach Leonardo as an anatomist in medical courses, a scientific pioneer in STEM fields, a master of composition in art history, a creative thinker in philosophy and psychology. Institutions like the Leonardo da Vinci Museum in Milan, the Clos Lucé Museum in France, the Vatican Library, the British Museum preserve and exhibit his manuscripts, inventions, and life's work. Sigmund Freud called Leonardo a man who awoke too early in the darkness. Einstein revered Leonardo for blending imagination with rationality. Walter Isaacson, author of Leonardo da Vinci Biography, wrote, "He was history's most creative genius precisely because he spanned so many disciplines. Leonardo is often held up as the ideal of lifelong learning, proof that the mind can evolve and cross-pollinate across fields. Leonardo has become a subject of cultural fascination, appearing in films like Ever After, The Da Vinci Code, and Assassin's Creed, novels exploring secret codes and lost works, documentaries showcasing his scientific mind. His image with long beard, intense eyes, and aged wisdom has become shorthand for genius. Leonardo's approach mirrors principles of design thinking, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. Systems theory, understanding complex systems in nature. Embodied cognition, linking the physical and intellectual. He anticipated the STEAM movement, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, proving that true innovation lives at the intersection of disciplines. Leonardo was celebrated in Italy, where he is a national icon, France, where he died and is honored, USA and UK, where his notebooks are displayed, Japan, Korea, India, where exhibitions about his work tour frequently. In 2019, on the 500th anniversary of his death, the world held global exhibitions, lectures, and documentaries in his honor. His universal appeal crosses cultures, ages, and ideologies. Leonardo's writings continue to inspire with clarity and depth. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Learning never exhausts the mind. The noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding. He who loves practice without theory is like the sailor who boards ship without a rudder. These maxims are quoted in leadership, education, creativity workshops, and personal development literature. Leonardo da Vinci did not create a school, write a great treatise, or found an institution, yet his legacy is everywhere in art, science, philosophy, and imagination. He taught the world that observation matters. Curiosity is sacred. Everything is connected. He made mystery respectable and questioning honorable. Leonardo da Vinci remains not only a historical figure, he is a living presence in the soul of human achievement. In 1516, at the age of 64, Leonardo da Vinci left Italy for the final time. His destination, France. He was invited by King Francis I, a Renaissance monarch who greatly admired Leonardo and sought to make him part of the French court. With three of his most important paintings, Mona Lisa, St. John the Baptist, and Virgin and Child, with St. Anne Leonardo, crossed the Alps into a new chapter of his life. He took with him his loyal assistant and protégé, Francesco Melzi, dozens of notebooks, unfinished works and inventions, his ever-burning curiosity. He settled at Château du Clos-Lucé, a manor in Amboise near the royal castle. There, he was given a generous pension and the title Premier Painter, Engineer, and Architect to the King. Though his health was declining, Leonardo remained mentally active, sketching, writing, designing, and mentoring. The last years of Leonardo's life were quieter but still filled with thought and observation. He focused less on painting and more on organizing his notebooks, mentoring Melzi, and reflecting on his lifetime of discoveries. He received visitors, artists, philosophers, architects, and scholars, all eager to learn from the master. King Francis I visited him often, and they developed a close friendship based on mutual admiration. Leonardo likely worked on urban planning ideas, water control systems, palace designs, further studies in anatomy and light. Though his physical strength was fading, records suggest he may have suffered a stroke that left his right hand paralyzed. His mind remained lucid and engaged. Though no major paintings were created in France, Leonardo did continue refining existing works. He likely made final touches to St. John the Baptist, a mysterious, sensual depiction of the prophet with a knowing smile and enigmatic gesture, Virgin and Child with St. Anne, which Leonardo had worked on for over a decade. He may also have begun new drawings and engineering designs, including plans for a mechanical lion that could walk and open its chest to present lilies, a gift for the king. More importantly, Leonardo spent time editing and preparing his life's work, knowing the end was near. In his final writings, Leonardo's tone is more contemplative, sometimes even melancholic. He wrote, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a well-spent life brings a happy death." And, "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have." These words do not indicate regret, but rather the perfectionism that haunted him throughout life. He saw the vastness of the world and believed he had only scratched the surface. Leonardo was aware that truth is infinite, and even a lifetime of inquiry would not be enough. Leonardo da Vinci died on May 2, 1519, at the age of 67, in his chamber at Clos-Lucé. According to his biographer, Giorgio Vasari, though likely romanticized, the King of France held Leonardo's head in his arms as he passed away. His last will and testament named Francesco Melzi as his principal heir, entrusting him with all his manuscripts, tools, and paintings. Other friends and servants were left generous sums. Leonardo was buried in the chapel of Saint Hubert, near the royal Château d'Amboise. The chapel still stands today and remains a site of pilgrimage for admirers from around the world. Leonardo's death marked the end of an extraordinary life, one not defined by wealth, fame, or conquest, but by observation, creativity, and boundless curiosity. He left behind about 15 completed paintings, thousands of notebook pages, dozens of inventions and designs, a vision of humanity in harmony with nature. In a world that often separates disciplines, Leonardo reminds us that everything is connected: biology with art, mechanics with grace, light with spirit. His final years, spent in relative peace and dignity, gave him time to contemplate the unity of all things, and perhaps to finally rest in the beauty he had spent a lifetime trying to understand. Leonardo da Vinci was not merely a man of his time. He was a man for all time. His later years, filled with thought, silence, and teaching, mirror the essence of who he was, a seeker, not of power or wealth, but of truth. He died as he lived in the company of ideas, surrounded by art, and in the service of understanding. As his epitaph might read, "Here lies one who saw the world not only as it is, but as it could be." Leonardo da Vinci was a painter, inventor, anatomist, engineer, scientist, architect, philosopher, and visionary. He lived from 1452 to 1519, a time when the world was waking up from medieval slumber into the bright light of the Renaissance. Born out of wedlock in a Tuscan village, denied formal education, Leonardo rose not by privilege, but by raw genius and unparalleled curiosity. He became a court painter, an advisor to kings, a dissector of the dead, a dreamer of flight, and a drawer of the divine. His life embodied the Renaissance ideal, the belief that humans, through observation and creativity, could grasp the infinite. A master of connections. What made Leonardo unique was not only his talent, but his ability to connect seemingly unrelated fields. He studied anatomy to paint the human form with lifelike precision. He observed bird flight to design machines that might one day fly. He examined light and optics to master the play of shadow in art. He explored geology and water flow to improve architecture and land use. While others specialized, Leonardo synthesized. He was not content with being a great painter. He wanted to understand the principles behind beauty. Leonardo redefined painting by introducing sfumato, the seamless blending of tones and edges, mastering chiaroscuro, the dramatic contrast between light and dark, humanizing religious scenes with emotional realism, using perspective and motion to create narrative depth. His works, Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, Virgin of the Rocks, are not just beautiful, they are living meditations on being, consciousness, and mystery. He taught future generations that painting is not just depiction, it is philosophy. Leonardo was a scientist without a laboratory, a researcher without credentials, and a genius without publication, yet his contributions are staggering. He dissected over 30 human corpses to create the most accurate anatomical drawings of his time. He designed machines that prefigured tanks, helicopters, and submarines. He wrote treatises on water, light, sound, mechanics, astronomy, and geology. His notebooks, unread for centuries, are now seen as some of the greatest treasures in human intellectual history. Leonardo believed that experience and observation were more valuable than dogma or second-hand learning. Study the science of art. Study the art of science. Develop your senses, especially learn how to see. He rejected superstition, questioned authority, and emphasized direct contact with the world. In this way, Leonardo was a proto-scientist, a proto-humanist, and a proto-modern thinker. Leonardo's notebooks are not just full of ideas, they are full of compassion. He studied the fetus, not out of curiosity alone, but out of reverence. He released birds from cages because freedom mattered. He drew old men with gnarled faces because beauty was not just youth. He saw wonder in the ordinary and poetry in the mechanical. He lived as someone who never stopped asking questions and never stopped marveling at existence. Today, Leonardo is a fixture in education, taught in schools across disciplines, a source of innovation, inspiring engineers and designers, a moral compass showing us the value of curiosity, humility, and courage, a cultural icon symbolizing what it means to pursue excellence across fields. In an age of specialization, Leonardo teaches us the value of breadth. In a world flooded with information, he reminds us of the power of wisdom. Leonardo never drew lines between art and science, thought and feeling. Today's biggest breakthroughs happen at the intersections. He asked, "Why do birds fly? How does blood move? What makes a smile mysterious?" Never stop asking why. Leonardo knew that the eye is the window to understanding. In an age of screens, he reminds us to look closer. He left many works unfinished, but his impact was total. Perfection is not required to leave a legacy. Leonardo found God not in temples, but in trees, rivers, muscles, and motion. In an age of disconnection, he urges us to reconnect with the natural world. Leonardo da Vinci died over 500 years ago, yet his thoughts still breathe, his paintings still smile, his machines still challenge, his spirit still whispers, "Learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else." Part 2. Michelangelo Buonarroti, the divine sculptor of the Renaissance. Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni was born on the 6th of March, 1475, in Caprese, a small town near Arezzo in the region of Tuscany, Italy. He was born into a respectable yet financially struggling Florentine family. His father, Lodovico Buonarroti, was a minor noble and local magistrate who hoped Michelangelo would one day become a civil servant or lawyer. But fate and young Michelangelo's stubborn will had other plans. Shortly after Michelangelo's birth, the family moved to Florence, a city at the heart of the Italian Renaissance, buzzing with artists, philosophers, and revolutionary thinkers. The spirit of humanism and artistic excellence surrounded him from a young age. After his mother, Francesca de' Neri, died when Michelangelo was only 6, he was sent to live with a stonecutter and his wife in Settignano, a small town known for its marble quarries. This seemingly minor event would have monumental consequences. Later in life, Michelangelo would write, "If there is any good in me, it is because I was born in the subtle air of your country of Arezzo, along with the milk of my nurse, I received the hammer and chisel with which I make my figures. From this early environment, Michelangelo absorbed the rhythm of carving, the sound of the mallet, and the feel of stone. Even before words could fully form in his mind, art had already claimed his soul. As a child, Michelangelo showed little interest in formal schooling. He was drawn instead to copying frescoes in nearby churches and sketching figures from life. At the age of 13, against his father's wishes, he was apprenticed to Domenico Ghirlandaio, a well-known Florentine painter. Ghirlandaio was a master of fresco, known for his intricate religious and historical scenes. Under his guidance, Michelangelo learned how to grind pigments and prepare plaster, how to design compositions, how to paint lifelike figures and perspective. But Michelangelo's talent quickly surpassed what painting alone could offer. He craved depth, form, and tactile expression. While Ghirlandaio painted images, Michelangelo longed to set them free from stone. In 1489, Ghirlandaio recognized the young artist's genius and recommended him to Lorenzo de' Medici, ruler of Florence and the most powerful art patron of the time. Lorenzo took Michelangelo into his court, giving him access to classical sculpture collections. Leading philosophers like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, artists, architects, and poets. He studied anatomy at the Santo Spirito Church, where a kindly prior let him dissect corpses in exchange for a wooden crucifix. He was only 17. This period awakened in Michelangelo a new intellectual depth. Surrounded by Neoplatonist thinkers, he began seeing the body not just as flesh, but as a vessel of divine beauty. Michelangelo's first recognized sculptures came from this fertile period of study and reflection. Battle of the Centaurs, 1491-1492. Carved in marble at age 16, this complex relief depicts a chaotic mythological struggle. It already shows Michelangelo's obsession with the male nude, twisting, muscular bodies in motion, dramatic narrative captured in a single moment. He would later say that this was the best work of his youth, a glimpse of the storm to come. Madonna of the Stairs, c. 1491. A gentle and shallow relief of the Virgin and Child. It echoes Donatello's style, but adds a unique solemnity, a quiet, spiritual grace that Michelangelo would develop further in later works. In 1492, Lorenzo de' Medici died. His successor, Piero, lacked his father's brilliance, and Florence soon descended into political instability. When the fanatical monk Girolamo Savonarola rose to power, calling for moral purges and rejecting secular art, Michelangelo wisely left Florence for Bologna and later Rome. It was in Rome that he would create one of the greatest sculptures the world had ever seen. In 1497, the French ambassador to the Vatican commissioned Michelangelo to sculpt a work for the tomb of Cardinal Jean Bilher. The result, La Pietà. This marble masterpiece depicts Mary cradling the dead body of Christ, not in agony, but in serene grief. Michelangelo was only 24 years old. The sculpture dazzled Rome. Its balance of tenderness and perfection, the smoothness of flesh, the composure of Mary, and the sadness of the scene were revolutionary. He signed the work the only time he ever did carving Michela N. Gelves Buonarrotivi's Florent Ims Facibat on Mary's sash after overhearing a man attribute it to another artist. The Pietà announced to the world, Michelangelo had arrived. David, symbol of Florentine freedom, returning to Florence in 1501, Michelangelo accepted a commission from the city's Cathedral Works Committee. His task, to sculpt a colossal statue of David, the biblical shepherd boy who defeated Goliath. The marble block had been abandoned for over 40 years, weather-worn and narrow. Most sculptors considered it unusable. But Michelangelo saw a hero within. For 2 years he worked in secrecy. When unveiled in 1504, the 17-foot statue stunned all of Florence. David was no child, he was a towering youth, muscles tense, eyes fierce, ready for battle. It became a symbol of Florence itself, small yet defiant, vulnerable yet powerful. This was no longer imitation of the ancients. This was the rebirth of heroic art. Michelangelo's early artistic philosophy was shaped by Neoplatonism, the belief that physical beauty reflects divine perfection, classical humanism, revival of ancient Greek and Roman ideals, religious spirituality rooted in Christian tradition but deeply personal. He believed sculpture was the purest art, calling painting merely drawing on a surface. Sculpture, to him, involved setting the soul free from stone. He often said, "The sculpture is already complete within the marble block. All I have to do is chip away the superfluous material." This idea that art is about revealing what already exists would define his approach for life. By his early 32nd, Michelangelo had created two of the most revered sculptures in history, Pietà and David, gained fame across Italy and beyond, proved himself not just as a technician, but as a philosopher artist. His foundation was now set carved in marble, tempered in politics, refined by thought. The world had not yet seen his greatest masterpieces, but already it knew his name would never be forgotten. Michelangelo was not easy to love, nor did he seem to want to be. He was famously intense, reclusive, moody, and fiercely independent, described by contemporaries as dark and solitary, violent in his opinions, a genius who walked with demons. He lived simply, often in poverty by choice, eating little, bathing rarely, sleeping in his clothes, and working for days without rest. He hated flattery, avoided social events, and often quarreled with patrons, even popes. But this temperament came from a place of deep sensitivity. Michelangelo felt everything, pain, beauty, God, with such force that it both tormented and inspired him. He once said, "If people knew how hard I worked to gain my mastery, it wouldn't seem so wonderful at all." Though he painted and wrote poetry, Michelangelo always identified first and foremost as a sculptor. "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free." This quote reveals his core philosophy. Sculpture is not an act of creation, but liberation. The figure already exists inside the stone, the artist merely uncovers it. To Michelangelo, sculpture was physical, requiring strength, endurance, and sweat; spiritual, revealing divine form in flesh; intellectual, guided by proportion, geometry, and study. He believed the human body was the highest expression of divine beauty, especially the male body, which appears prominently in his work. Ironically, two of Michelangelo's most famous achievements, the Sistine Chapel ceiling and the Last Judgment, were paintings. But he loathed the art of painting, often calling it inferior to sculpture. When Pope Julius II forced him to paint the Sistine ceiling, he protested bitterly. He wrote in a letter, "I've already grown a goiter from this torture. I'm no painter." And yet, he painted over 5,000 square feet of fresco, lying on scaffolding, arms raised, neck craned, for 4 grueling years alone. That contradiction defines Michelangelo. He despised limitations, yet produced miracles under pressure. Michelangelo was not content to merely copy nature, he sought its ideal. Inspired by Neoplatonism, he believed the material world was a shadow of spiritual truth. To him, muscles were not just anatomical features, they were expressions of power and will. Eyes were not just for seeing, they were portals to the soul. Hands were not just tools, they were divine instruments of creation. Every figure he sculpted or painted pulses with potential energy bodies twisting, reaching, resisting gravity. Unlike Leonardo, who painted the world as it was, Michelangelo carved the world as it should be. Michelangelo believed that divinity was best expressed in the human form, and especially in the male nude. which appears consistently across his work. From David to Adam, from Christ to ignudy nude male youths in the Sistine Chapel, the male body for Michelangelo was a symbol of perfection, a vessel for suffering, a canvas for transcendence. He rarely painted or sculpted overt emotion. His figures expressed their inner worlds through physical tension, posture, muscular form. Even in death, as in Pietà or The Last Judgment, Michelangelo's bodies speak volumes without words. One of Michelangelo's stylistic hallmarks is contrapposto, a stance where the body twists with asymmetrical balance. This creates a sense of potential motion, even in stillness. Exemples include David, head turned, hips tilted, hand holding stone as if in mid-thought before action. Moses, seated but dynamic, muscles tense, beard flowing like a river. The creation of Adam, fingers just inches from touching, the gap charged with energy. He sculpted emotion through motion, not facial expression. This made his work feel timeless, less a depiction of a moment, more a revelation of force. Michelangelo's art often contains elements of struggle. Struggle between flesh and spirit, between mortality and divinity, between beauty and agony. Even his unfinished sculptures, the so-called prisoners or slaves, show torsos emerging from marble as if trying to escape. They are metaphors for the soul trapped in the body or the artist trapped by limitations. He was fascinated by imperfection, by tension, by brokenness, and yet he sought through this struggle to reveal truth and transcendence. Few know that Michelangelo wrote nearly 300 poems, most unpublished in his lifetime. His verses reveal longing for spiritual purity, conflicted feelings about love and the body, fear of death, praise for beauty and creative fire. One poem reads, "The greatest artist has no conception that a single marble block does not contain within its excess, and that is only attained by the hand that obeys the intellect." Even his poetry returns to his sculptor's worldview. The art is already within the stone. Michelangelo never married and had no known romantic relationships, but he formed deep attachments to certain individuals, most notably Tommaso dei Cavalieri, a Roman nobleman and the subject of many passionate poems and drawings, Vittoria Colonna, a noblewoman and poet with whom he shared a spiritual and intellectual bond. He often struggled with guilt and longing, torn between flesh and faith. These inner conflicts deeply informed his art, especially in later works like The Last Judgment, where damned souls twist in existential agony. Michelangelo's artistic style was not gentle or decorative. It was powerful, spiritual, tragic, and heroic. Where Leonardo gave us serenity, Michelangelo gave us suffering and triumph. Where Raphael painted harmony, Michelangelo sculpted struggle. Where others refined the external, Michelangelo explored the internal, the soul trapped in matter. He believed that the artist's task was not to decorate the world, but to reveal its divine essence through intensity and form. To look at a Michelangelo sculpture is to see not just stone, but spirit breaking through flesh. The David, a symbol of human potential, carved between 1501 and 1504. Michelangelo's David remains one of the most iconic sculptures in human history. Created from a massive, flawed block of marble previously discarded by other artists, Michelangelo saw what others could not, a hero within the stone. Unlike previous depictions of David as a victorious warrior, Michelangelo's David is captured before the battle, calm but tense, calculating but resolute. The sculpture became a symbol of Florentine independence, a metaphor for the little city-state standing defiant against the Goliaths of the world, particularly the Medici. Stands at 17 feet tall, perfect anatomical proportions, inspired by classical Greek statuary, contrapposto stance, left leg relaxed, right leg tense, torso twisting slightly, a study in balance and potential motion, veins, muscles, and sinews rendered with uncanny realism. David is not just beautiful, he is idealized humanity, intellect and power merged in marble. The Pietà, grief made divine. Michelangelo's Pietà, completed in 1499 at age 24, is a masterwork of emotion and form. Commissioned for the tomb of a French cardinal, it now resides in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. Depicts the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Christ. Mary appears youthful, serene, and calm, not agonized. Christ's body is rendered with tenderness, limbs relaxed, skin soft. Michelangelo's Mary is a symbol of eternal spiritual grace, not simply a grieving mother. The composition forms a pyramidal shape, emphasizing harmony and stability. Michelangelo never signed another work, but in this one he etched. Michelangelo Buonarroti Florentine made this. Legend has it he overheard viewers attributing the sculpture to someone else and, in a rare act of ego, decided to make his authorship known. The Sistine Chapel Ceiling, a cosmic canvas. From 1508 to 1512, Michelangelo painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, a task he originally resisted, calling himself a sculptor, not a painter. But Pope Julius II insisted, and the result is one of the most breathtaking feats of Western art. Covers over 5,000 square feet, contains over 300 figures. Completed entirely by Michelangelo, working mostly alone, painted on scaffolding, often lying on his back. Central panels depict the 9 stories from Genesis, including the creation of Adam, the fall of man, the flood. Surrounding figures include the Ignudi, powerful, nude male figures symbolizing divine beauty, prophets and sibyls, seers from the Bible and classical mythology, ancestors of Christ, connecting the Old and New Testaments. This panel, where God reaches out to touch Adam's finger, is arguably the most reproduced image in art history. It symbolizes divine spark and the birth of human consciousness, the relationship between creator and created, the near mystical moment before life begins, the Last Judgment. Apocalypse on a wall. Painted between 1536 and 1541, the Last Judgment covers the altar wall of the Sistine Chapel. Unlike the ceiling's idealism, this work is dark, turbulent, and terrifying. Christ stands at the center, raising his arm to separate the blessed from the damned. Saints float, gesture, plead, and accuse. The damned are dragged to hell by demons and fear. Angels blow trumpets. Martyrs hold their instruments of torture. This is Michelangelo's vision of the end of time, less theological, more existential. It reflects his own spiritual fears, his disillusionment with the corruption of the church, his awareness of mortality. In a haunting detail, Michelangelo included a self-portrait in the flayed skin of St. Bartholomew, perhaps a metaphor for his suffering, guilt, or self-doubt. Moses, the wrathful prophet. Commissioned for the tomb of Pope Julius II, Michelangelo's Moses, 1513-1515, sits enthroned, larger than life, holding the tablets of the law. Long flowing beard like waves of marble. Muscles tensed as if ready to stand. Horns on his head due to a mistranslation of the Hebrew Bible. Rays of light to horns. Moses' divine fury, made flesh, embodying righteous anger, spiritual authority, and inner restraint. Michelangelo said of the sculpture, "Speak, damn you, speak!" as if expecting his creation to come alive. The Medici tombs, the mystic poetry of night and day. Commissioned in the 1522nd for the Medici Chapel in Florence, these tombs feature allegorical sculptures of night and day, dawn and dusk. They rest atop the sarcophagi of 2 Medici dukes, framing reclining human figures neither alive nor asleep, but somewhere between dream and death. Night is a female nude, reclining in twisted posture, with an owl and a mask. Day is a muscular male, tense and turning. Dawn rises with sorrowful grace. Dusk sinks with weary strength. The Medici tombs reflect Michelangelo's late style, haunted, unresolved, and metaphysical. Later in life, Michelangelo turned to architecture, designing buildings with the same dramatic force as his sculptures. Laurentian Library, Florence. Staircase appears to flow like lava from the entrance. Columns sunken into walls, a bold rejection of classical rules. Dynamic space meant to inspire contemplation and movement. St. Peter's Basilica, Rome. Took over as chief architect in 1546, designed the massive dome, which became the model for St. Paul's Cathedral, London. The U.S. Capitol, the Pantheon, Paris. Michelangelo saw architecture as living sculpture, using light, shadow, and form to create sacred space. Michelangelo worked on the Rondinini Pietà until 6 days before his death in 1564. Unlike his earlier Pietà, this sculpture is fragile, elongated, and incomplete. Christ is upright, supported by Mary from behind. The figures are fused, ghostly, almost abstract. It is a sculpture of grief, surrender, and departure. Here, Michelangelo lets go of perfection and allows the soul to shine through. Michelangelo's masterpieces across sculpture, painting, and architecture are not merely technical triumphs, they are emotional revelations. He showed the world that the body can speak the language of spirit, struggle can be beautiful. Art is not comfort, it is truth, carved in stone. Every chisel mark, every painted limb, every building plan was an attempt to touch eternity. Michelangelo lived in an age where art and religion were inseparable. The Catholic Church was the dominant force in Europe spiritually, culturally, and politically. The Renaissance popes were not only religious leaders but powerful rulers, commissioning art to assert their authority, glorify God, and immortalize their names. Michelangelo's career was deeply intertwined with this power structure. His greatest works, the Pietà, the Sistine Chapel, the Last Judgment, the Medici tombs, St. Peter's Dome were all religious commissions, yet his relationship with the church was far from easy. In 1505, Michelangelo was summoned to Rome by Pope Julius II, one of the most ambitious and forceful popes in history. Nicknamed Il Papa Terribile, Julius was determined to leave behind the grandest tomb ever created, and Michelangelo was chosen to build it. The project was to include over 40 marble statues. Michelangelo spent months in Carrara quarries selecting marble, only to have the project halted when Julius shifted focus to rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica. Michelangelo was furious. He left Rome, returned to Florence, and refused to come back. Eventually, after pressure and diplomacy, he returned only to be assigned an even more daunting task, painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, something he tried to decline. Their relationship was contentious, competitive, yet strangely fruitful. Julius was the only pope Michelangelo truly respected, perhaps, because they shared the same willful fire. After Julius's death, Leo X of Medici took the papal throne in 1513. Michelangelo returned to Florence and was commissioned to design the Medici Chapel and Library of San Lorenzo. But this Medici pope, unlike Lorenzo the Magnificent, was more interested in politics than philosophy. Michelangelo's progress was slow, and tensions brewed over payment, planning, and priorities. The grand tomb of Julius II, now sidelined, was eventually completed in reduced form with Moses as its central figure, a symbol of artistic compromise under papal politics. Clement VII, another Medici pope, requested Michelangelo return to the Sistine Chapel, this time to paint the Last Judgment on the altar wall. This commission marked a theological shift in Michelangelo's work. From creation and optimism in the ceiling to judgment and turmoil on the altar wall. The sack of Rome in 1527 and the rise of Protestantism had shaken the church. Clement wanted an apocalyptic image to reassert divine authority, and Michelangelo delivered. When Clement died, Paul III inherited the project. A shrewd and politically savvy pope, Paul supported Michelangelo even as the Council of Trent began cracking down on artistic nudity. The Last Judgment, filled with nude figures in dramatic contortions, scandalized some cardinals. One even commissioned an artist to paint loincloths over the genitals, known as the fig leaf campaign. Michelangelo was outraged. When Biagio da Cesena, the papal master of ceremonies, condemned the work, Michelangelo painted him into the fresco as Minos in hell, complete with donkey ears and a snake biting his genitals. Paul reportedly laughed, saying he had no authority in hell, so the image stayed. Michelangelo was a deeply spiritual man, but not always in line with church orthodoxy. He was drawn to personal devotion over institutional rituals, Christian Neoplatonism, belief in divine beauty, spiritual ascent, and the soul's yearning for God, mysticism and introspection. His letters and poems reveal guilt, longing, and fear of damnation. He often lamented the vanity of art and his own pride. My life's journey is nearing its end. The wrong I did, the good I did not do, haunt me. I see clearly how false were my dreams. His later works, especially the Rondinini Pietà, reflect a shift toward humility, brokenness, and surrender. In 1546, Pope Paul III appointed Michelangelo chief architect of St. Peter's Basilica, the greatest building project of the Renaissance. Though in his 72nd, Michelangelo took the task as a spiritual mission. He redesigned the building's plan and created the dome, a feat of engineering that would inspire future generations. He refused payment, saying, "I do this for the love of God." His dome, later completed after his death, crowns the spiritual and architectural heart of Catholicism. Though he worked for popes, Michelangelo remained loyal to Florentine Republican ideals. He once helped fortify Florence during a rebellion against Medici rule, even drawing military defenses. This duality, creating for power, yet distrusting it, made Michelangelo's life and work full of tension and ambiguity. Michelangelo's career was shaped by popes, cardinals, and religious commissions, but his true loyalty was to truth, not power. He served God more than the church, and faith more than dogma. He battled censorship, political interference, and ecclesiastical egos, yet produced some of the most sacred images in Western art. His legacy is not just in stone or paint, but in his moral struggle to serve the divine while living among kings and priests. He did not merely decorate churches, he gave them soul. Michelangelo's impact did not end with his death in 1564. It expanded, casting a shadow across centuries. His vision of the human body, divine form, and emotional power set the standard for artists throughout the Renaissance, Mannerism, Baroque, and even modernism. His legacy became a benchmark of artistic greatness, a source of emulation, rebellion, admiration, and fear. Even during his lifetime, Michelangelo's work influenced the most celebrated artists of his day. Raphael. Though younger, Raphael absorbed Michelangelo's sculptural forms and anatomical mastery, incorporating them into works like the School of Athens and Transfiguration. Raphael added grace and balance to Michelangelo's raw force. Titian. The Venetian master borrowed Michelangelo's muscular drama and merged it with Venetian color and sensuality, especially in works like Assumption of the Virgin. Sebastiano del Piombo. A close friend of Michelangelo, Sebastiano, collaborated with him on frescoes and adopted his monumental forms and sculptural drama. Michelangelo didn't just inspire, he intimidated. Even skilled artists feared comparison. After Michelangelo, the high Renaissance ideal of balance gave way to mannerism, a style marked by twisting, elongated forms, unnatural poses, psychological intensity, complexity over clarity. Painters like Pontormo, Rosso, Fiorentino, and Parmigianino exaggerated Michelangelo's style to the point of stylized abstraction. His influence had shifted art from harmony to expressive distortion, a transformation that opened the door to emotional depth and spiritual ambiguity. In the 17th century, Baroque artists embraced Michelangelo's passion, movement, and spirituality. Caravaggio. Though stylistically different, Caravaggio shared Michelangelo's love of physicality and dramatic light. His figures, like Michelangelo's, seemed to burst from the frame, caught in moments of divine or human tension. Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Bernini, the supreme Baroque sculptor, absorbed Michelangelo's dynamism and took it further. His Ecstasy of St. Teresa feels like a Michelangelo dream in motion, with spiritual rapture made flesh. Influence on sculptors. Michelangelo's treatment of marble became the gold standard. Auguste Rodin saw him as a precursor to modern emotional sculpture. Henry Moore said Michelangelo taught him how form reveals soul. Canova, Cellini, Thorvaldsen, and Howden all studied his techniques. He proved that stone could speak, cry, strain, collapse, and transcend, and sculptors have tried to follow ever since. Architecture and urban design. Michelangelo's late architectural designs influenced Baroque churches with dramatic interiors and expressive spaces, neoclassical domes, especially in St. Peter's Basilica, urban planners who admired his understanding of perspective and human-centered design. Even modern architects like Le Corbusier acknowledged Michelangelo's ability to shape space with feeling. Intellectual and philosophical influence. Michelangelo embodied the Renaissance ideal of the complete human being, someone shaped not only by craft, but by mind and spirit. Thinkers saw in him a union of faith and doubt, a merging of art and metaphysics, a model of creative torment where the pursuit of beauty requires suffering. He became an icon not only for artists, but for poets, philosophers, and psychologists seeking to understand the sublime and the tragic in human nature. Michelangelo appears in poetry by Goethe, Rainer Maria Rilke, and T.S. Eliot. Novels like The Agony and the Ecstasy by Irving Stone, which became a major film, plays and operas based on his letters, life, and emotional struggles. Cinema, where he's often portrayed as both genius and tortured soul. He is not just studied, he is mythologized. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Michelangelo has inspired psychological analysis. Freud wrote an essay on Moses' statue. Queer studies, exploring his sexuality and emotional relationships. Theology, examining his depictions of divine judgment and grace. Art therapy, using his unfinished works as metaphors for trauma and liberation. His story transcends time because it speaks to every generation's need to find beauty amid struggle. Today, Million Visite. The Sistine Chapel in Vatican City. David at the Galleria dell'Accademia in Florence. The Pietà in St. Peter's Basilica. Medici tombs at San Lorenzo. Moses in San Pietro in Vincoli, Rome. These sites are not just tourist attractions, they are shrines. To stand before a Michelangelo sculpture is to confront something both divine and human. Art schools and universities teach his use of anatomy, mastery of perspective, gesture and tension, poetic symbolism. Even in digital classrooms, his name appears alongside Da Vinci, Rembrandt, and Picasso as one of the pillars of visual expression. Quotes from legends about Michelangelo. Vasari, he was alone, supreme, not only among sculptors, but in architecture and painting. Rodin. Michelangelo is the greatest of them all, the sculptor who gave me my God. Picasso. When I saw Michelangelo's work, I knew I had to rebel against him or be crushed. Even rebellion affirms influence. Michelangelo didn't just shape marble. He shaped the imagination of Western civilization. Every muscle he carved inspired a generation of painters. Every chapel wall he painted turned stone into theater. Every sorrow he sculpted made beauty out of suffering. He gave artists permission to be tormented, to be ambitious, to reach beyond boundaries. His work is not static. It is alive, still speaking, still challenging, still transforming the way we see form, flesh, and the infinite. Michelangelo was not just a man. He was a force. Late years, spiritual crisis, and final works. The Twilight of a Titan. By the 1542nd, Michelangelo was in his late 62nd, a remarkable age for the 16th century. Yet instead of slowing down, he entered a new phase, deeper, more introspective, and increasingly spiritual. His outer world may have been dominated by architectural duties at St. Peter's Basilica, but his inner world grew more haunted, poetic, and devotional. He became a man increasingly aware of his mortality, his sins, and his need for salvation themes that would dominate his final artworks and writings. Michelangelo, the poet. Over the course of his life, Michelangelo wrote nearly 300 poems. But his later verses are especially powerful, a window into his soul. He wrote about the futility of fame, the vanity of physical beauty, the ache of desire and the tension between body and soul, the fear of divine judgment. One famous sonnet reads, "Now hath my life across a stormy sea, like a frail bark reached that wide port where all are bidden ere the final reckoning fall of good and evil for eternity." His verses mirror the tone of his final sculptures, stripped down, raw, incomplete yet profound. Michelangelo's late years were marked by an increasing asceticism. He gave up most comforts, ate little, slept even less, dressed in old clothes, spent hours in solitude. He was deeply influenced by Vittoria Colonna, a noblewoman and poet who became his spiritual confidant. Their friendship was grounded in shared beliefs about divine grace, the reformation of the Church, and the importance of inner faith over rituals. Through her, Michelangelo came into contact with reformist Catholic circles, not Protestant, but critical of corruption in the Vatican. This further deepened his conflicted relationship with power and religion. The Rondinini Pietà, a sculpture of surrender. Michelangelo began working on the Rondinini Pietà around 1552 when he was nearly 77 years old. He would return to it again and again for over a decade, carving, revising, even destroying earlier sections. He was working on it just 6 days before his death. The sculpture is thin, elongated, and nearly abstract. Christ stands supported by Mary. They almost merge into one figure. It lacks polish or anatomical perfection. Compared to the youthful power of David or the polished serenity of the early Pietà, this work is frail, ethereal, ghostly. It is Michelangelo letting go of flesh, of form, of the world. It is a sculpture of acceptance and grace of a man who had spent his life carving, now carving his own mortality. Despite his advanced age, Michelangelo continued his architectural work with remarkable energy. St. Peter's Basilica took over in 1540 after Antonio da Sangallo's death, simplified and unified the design, created the plans for the Great Dome, later completed by Giacomo della Porta. The dome remains a symbol of Catholic majesty, one of the greatest engineering feats in architectural history, standing as both a temple and a tomb. The Laurentian Library vestibule, a staircase that flows like liquid marble, columns embedded within walls, defying classical rules, a dynamic, expressive space architecture. As drama, Michelangelo was not bound by tradition. He invented new forms, even in his old age. In his last letters, Michelangelo often wrote of wasting time on things of the world, waking too late to the light of faith, yearning for divine mercy. He knew the end was near, and faced it not with fear, but with honesty, humility, and surrender. He wrote, "Neither painting nor sculpture now can quiet the soul that turns to that divine love, which opened his arms upon the cross to take us." Michelangelo died on the 18th of February, 1564, in Rome, at the age of 88, an astonishing lifespan for his time. His body was secretly transported to Florence against the wishes of the papacy, and buried at Basilica of Santa Croce, the resting place of Italy's greatest minds, Galileo, Machiavelli, and later Rossini. His tomb was designed by Giorgio Vasari, who wrote the first biography of Michelangelo. Michelangelo's final years are often overlooked in favor of his youthful masterpieces, but they contain some of his deepest truths. That perfection fades, but sincerity endures. That letting go is its own form of mastery. That even genius must bow to time and grace. He died not as a celebrity, but as a penitent, a poet, and a pilgrim of the soul. In the end, Michelangelo chiseled not just stone, but his own ego, ambition, and fame into submission before God. He showed us that the greatest journey is not outward but inward, not upward toward glory but downward into truth. Michelangelo's final years were not his decline, they were his ascension. Michelangelo Buonarroti was born in 1475 into a world brimming with potential, the early Renaissance, and left it in 1564, having shaped that world more profoundly than almost any other individual. He was a sculptor who breathed life into marble, painter who captured the divine and the damned, architect who shaped the very heart of Rome, poet whose verses bared his soul. Michelangelo was not merely a master of technique. He was a wrestler of the human condition, using art to explore power, pain, glory, and grace. Michelangelo's artistic legacy lies most powerfully in his depiction of the human body, not in passive beauty, but in active struggle, in divine tension. His David is not just a boy, he is human will before the storm. His Pietà is not just a mother and son, it is divine sorrow in flesh. His Sistine Chapel is not just a ceiling, it is a cosmic theater of creation. He saw the body as the language of the soul, and stone as its translator. Michelangelo did not write manifestos, nor did he teach in academies, yet his art is philosophy made visible. He grappled with questions such as, what is beauty? Where is God? Can flesh contain spirit? Is suffering redemptive? He used contrapposto to suggest moral hesitation, muscle to suggest emotion, and unfinished surfaces to express existential tension. Michelangelo's figures seem to carry not just weight, but consciousness. Throughout his life, Michelangelo battled the limits of material, fighting with flawed marble, the demands of patrons, particularly popes and Medici dukes, the burdens of fame, reluctant to engage the public, his own doubts and guilt recorded in his poetry and late works. He was often described as solitary, driven, tormented, uncompromising, and yet he was also deeply spiritual, loyal to friends, and committed to truth. He believed that the artist's job was not comfort but confrontation. Michelangelo helped redefine what it meant to be an artist. Before him, artists were seen largely as artisans. After him, they were seen as intellectuals, visionaries, and cultural forces. He inspired Renaissance masters like Raphael and Titian, Baroque giants like Bernini and Caravaggio, modern artists like Rodin, Moore, Bacon, and even Picasso. His art gave later generations permission to explore spiritual doubt, emotional pain, the complexity of beauty, the unfinished and imperfect, Today, Michelangelo's name is taught across disciplines, in art schools for form, gesture, and composition, in theology for depictions of divinity and judgment, in psychology for the idea of the tormented genius, in literature and philosophy for the existential weight of his work. He is not simply part of art history, he is part of human cultural memory. His sculptures and paintings remain pilgrimage sites for artists, thinkers, and spiritual seekers. The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it. Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it. I am still learning. Even in old age, Michelangelo saw himself not as a master, but as a student of life, God, and truth. In the 21st century, Michelangelo's story is more relevant than ever. He reminds us that greatness comes with solitude. He worked alone, suffered in silence, and still changed the world. Perfection is a journey, not a state. His Rondinini Pietà is unfinished, and all the more beautiful for it. Beauty and pain can coexist. His art carries the weight of grief, yet it glows with the sacred. The body is divine. In an age of disconnection, his work calls us to reverence our flesh and humanity. Faith must be personal. Michelangelo shows that spirituality can be fierce, intimate, and beyond doctrine. Michelangelo died at the age of 88, still sculpting, still seeking, still uncertain. But his art endures. It does not ask for easy answers. It asks us to feel. To look at his work is to see the agony of life, the majesty of the soul, the handprint of God in stone. He left us not just monuments, he left us mirrors to see ourselves more clearly and perhaps more compassionately.